Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025. So, tonight, I titled this on the invitation for our inner circle folks. I titled this Boundaries and Letting Go, but really what it is, it's a shift in paradigms in the way that we think about how we use what the context is for our boundaries and letting go. So, I'm going to be talking as much about a shift in thinking, a change in thinking, and then subsequent to that, I'll talk about then how boundaries then fit in, how letting go fits into that. Before I get into the content of tonight's broadcast, let me go over some housekeeping. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you're interested in looking into your own work, in fact, some of the quotes that I'll be sharing with you this evening will be in support of this idea, this project. We have a Finding You intensive next week, October 1st through 5th. That is our flagship program. I think there's a spot available yet. So if you're interested, you can make it. You want to either do a deep dive, you want to really accelerate your therapy. A Finding You intensive is that opportunity. It's a look back into your own childhood, your own past, your own emotional history, and understanding how that's playing out all over the place in your life, all over the place in your relationships today, or whatever dilemmas or challenges you might be facing. After that, we have November 5th, December 3rd, and then again, January 7th, February 4th, and March 4th. So if you're looking for something to accelerate your therapy, if you don't know what it is when I say do your work, this is a great option to start that out, to set that frame for you. All other inquiries for intensives for couples and for families, you can go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. We are now hosting support groups for the alumni of our Finding You programs. The next one for that is October 15th. We just had one last week, September 17th. So once a month, we'll be hosting those for the alumni. You can go to our website or email us. If you're looking for a coach or a therapist who follows or is informed by the model that I teach, which is some ways we talk about it in terms of depth psychology, analytic informed therapy, attachment-based therapy, you can email us at that email or go to our website and we can match you up with a therapist or coach that's right for you. I'm so excited. It's coming soon. I'll be in New York, in Rhinebeck, New York, in the Hudson Valley this October 12th through 17th. I'm going to be hosting a 5-day workshop on the Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self with my daughter, Emma Reedy June. I'm very excited about that. It's only around $500 once you're staying at the Omega Institute. So if you're looking for something affordable, something that combines the work that I talk about here with some experiential activities, the Audacity to Be You workshop is that offering. If you're interested, go to the Omega website at eomega.org. That's eomega.org. Click on the workshops tab, find the Audacity to Be You workshop, and sign up there. I'll be back in the Bay Area later on next month, October 25th, for a day talking about compassionate parenting. So, and that's in conjunction with the Palo Alto Preparatory Academy. So if you're interested, check that out. We'll have the opportunity to go through some of the exercises for boundaries for some of the stuff that I'm talking about this evening. So I really look forward to that. It'll be our second one back there in the Bay Area. If you haven't heard, we have the Finding You Inner Circle. Now, this is a subscription to the podcast, which affords you live access to these broadcasts, so you can watch me film them live. You can participate in the Ask Me Anything episodes in real time, and you can get access to a couple of episodes that are only published for the Finding You Inner Circle. So it's $100 a year, $10 per month. You can cancel at any time. Again, email us at info@findingyouprograms.com or go to our website and find the link there. With that, I'm happy to get into tonight's content. I was talking to somebody who also works with my therapist and my family recently, and they were reminding me of a story that I'd heard my therapist tell. She's a grandmother, and she was visiting one of her grandchildren back east. And in the course of doing so, she needed a loaf of bread, as mundane as that might be. And so she went to the grocery store with her grandson. And when they were in the store, the grandson, being the tween that he was, started criticizing his grandmother, saying, "Grandma, how can you dress like that in public? You look so ridiculous." And the grandson said, "How will anybody know how important you are? What big of a deal you are?" And as my therapist tells this story, she concludes that she told her grandson she just wanted to get a loaf of bread. And that kind of story is indicative of the kind of stories that my therapist tells, because what she's showing is the shift in consciousness, right? The grandson, like a lot of teens and preteens, is focused on image, is focused on ego, is focused on everybody thinking a certain thing about them. And what Jamie, as a grandmother, was saying to her grandson was, I came here not trying to impress, not trying to let people know that I was important or that I was a big deal, but I came here looking for a loaf of bread. So tonight, as I talk about boundaries and letting go, I'm going to start off with it and frame everything within a kind of shift of consciousness. Like that story, we have to start thinking differently. In fact, I reflected upon this story as somebody from my family was sharing it. And I was saying that's a lot of how Jamie's stories go. It takes a moment to realize what she's saying and what is required to understand the moral of the story is you have to shift your consciousness. You have to realize or think about something in a different way to understand it. So if the story didn't make sense to you, that's the point of the story, is you have to think about things differently. So we use stories, we use allegories, we use myth, parable, analogies, metaphor, and symbols. We use them because often what we're talking about is a shift in consciousness, in thinking about things a different way. As I often say, that the tool has very little value intrinsically outside of its context. In the simple example that I often use, it's a hammer. A hammer can be used to destroy, a hammer can be used to build, a hammer can be used to hurt somebody. So the tool itself only makes sense, only has its value within the context of the person using it. So as we talk about boundaries, I think one of the things that happens is I do broadcasts on boundaries over the decades that I've been doing them. And people come back with more questions and not really understanding the subtleties, maybe the nuances, probably the paradox of boundaries. What I think is happening is people are thinking about boundaries within the context of their old level of consciousness. In essence, most people think about boundaries similar to the way that they think about limits or consequences. We think about them mostly in terms of how will they change the people around us. In fact, I would argue that psychotherapy, and I'll confess, at least for me, when I first began as a participant, as a patient, as a client in psychotherapy, I was really looking for my therapist to provide me with tools, ideas, concepts, hacks, spells, if you will, symbolically speaking, that I could cast on the people of my life in my life that could change them. Tell me what I need to do. Tell me what I need to say. Tell me the tricks or the secret codes that I'm sure you have access to, that if I employ will get the people around me to behave the way that I want them to in relationship to me. But of course, I had to learn through the futility of that idea, that exercise, that ask, that hope, that wasn't working. That's not what I was getting. In fact, I've shared this recently. I've quit therapy a couple of times in my adult life, because it didn't give me what I thought I needed. It didn't give me that magic, that potion that would change everybody around me. And I came to realize that the reason that therapy wasn't quote unquote working for me is because I thought it was going to change my context, my circumstances, the people in my life, my wife, my children. When fundamentally, as I understand psychotherapy today and now, what it does is it changes me as a client. It changes me. And that change can have a wonderful impact on the people around me. But in some cases, the people around me aren't around me anymore. Right? That's not true of course, my wife and my children. But I've had to make a lot of changes. There's an old saying in recovery that says you have to change your playground and your playmates. You can't go back into the same context. It doesn't work, especially for new people in sobriety, to go to the same bar, to hang out with the same people using the same substances. Eventually, that will rub off on you. And if that is the only way you can demonstrate your power in this, you've lost the whole paradox of letting go, of surrender. And letting go and surrender, I want to be as emphatic as I can be this evening. Those are not passive character traits. Learning to let go, embodying letting go and surrender are powerful, assertive, courageous steps that we take in our life. To not go into the bar, to decide like I had to as a teenager. Nobody needed to tell me this when I wanted to be sober as a teenager. Nobody needed to tell me by that time that I couldn't hang out with my friends who were using on a daily basis. It was inherently clear to, it was obvious to me that that was necessary, probably because I had tried the other way before. And I found myself behaving more like them than them like me. So to let go means that we take courageous steps in our lives, that we do things like, my favorite example of letting go is telling the truth. So when people think about surrender, when they think about letting go, I once had a client say to me about her child. She said, my son doesn't like to talk about letting go. He wants me to use a new word. He doesn't like the word surrender. He wants me to find a new word for it. And I said, well, that's an ask of his. Those asks suggest to me that he doesn't, number one, understand them. And number two, he hasn't taken them in. He doesn't know what it means to surrender. To surrender to the idea that I'm, for example, an alcoholic, is not to carry this lifelong burden, this shameful label. It is to say my relationship with alcohol is such that once I take that first drink, I'm going to take that second drink and so on. So to surrender is to accept that about myself. One of the things that you can apply that to a lot of areas in your life that are much lighter, much lower stakes than that. I'm not going to go out and have a drink with a friend at 10 o'clock on a weeknight because I know that if I do that, I'm not going to get home until 3. I know myself well enough. I've accepted who I am, my relationship with these things. I surrender the ego that I'm stronger, that I'm bigger than this. These are really spiritual tasks. So we use metaphors, stories, parables, symbols to demonstrate something that's bigger than a first order change, than a behavioral change, something that is a new way of thinking, a new sensibility, a new way of relating to ourselves, to life, to relationship, to substances, to sex, to gambling, to work, and so forth. To understand boundaries, we have to shift our current level of consciousness. We have to shift the very nature of what we think about parenting and children. We have to understand who we are in relationship to our children. What is our task? What is our role? One of my very favorite quotes that I often recite is James Hollis saying that he sees in so many of his clients, he's an analyst, and he sees in so many of his clients that they have accepted the wrong answers to life's most important questions. What we were taught, what the dominant culture teaches us, is not necessarily true. We have to practice healthy doubt and skepticism. Really, fundamentally, we have to practice critical thinking. To look at what we have been taught, what's been modeled for us, and to question it. Speaking of this kind of shift, this paradigmatic shift, from The Audacity to Be You, I wrote, Joseph Campbell, a foremost American expert in mythology, explained that the purpose of the heroic journey illustrated in our myths is to describe a transformation of consciousness. The kind of change he is talking about is more than a new skill or tool. This shift is fundamental. It is a different way of being. This transformation is even beyond an explanation. It's difficult to put into words or to explain to another person, which is why it is often illustrated through stories or examples. The story, or in other words, in Campbell's work, he calls it the myth, shows us what it would look like, what it would sound like if we experience this change in ourselves. To become born again, for example, is to realize this. That is such a powerful image of being born again that it lets you know how phenomenally different the experience is before and after this realization. Joseph Campbell goes on to explain the lessons from the prophets are vertical rather than horizontal. In other words, the prophets see different levels or layers of life. They're not offering us necessarily a history lesson or a glimpse into the future. They're providing us with a different meaning to our lives. Campbell explained that mythology is psychology, misread as biography, history, and cosmology. I was listening to a book last week, and somebody was offering their opinion about the best ways to understand psychology. And they said there are 3 ways in their mind that are the best. And one is to read and study Greek mythology, because those were metaphors of the energies inside of us. That was the original parts work. What does it mean when we are embodying Athena or Ares or Eros? Right? What does that energy mean? Can we speak to that? It's like when my son Jacob said, when he was 5 years old, he's now 32, and he stopped Peter Pan. We were watching Disney's Peter Pan, the cartoon, and he said, "Dad," he said, "Captain Hook is not bad, right? He's sad." And I said, "That's exactly right, Jake." And then he pressed play. Jake at 5 was already understanding that the purpose of the story wasn't necessarily to identify with the hero or the heroine, the prince or the princess, the hero in the story, but the idea was to identify with all the characters. We know Captain Hook because we know about the Captain Hook within us. We know about that kind of bitterness, that kind of anger, that kind of jealousy and rage, that kind of want to hurt others so that we're not alone in our pain. We know what that feels like. We know what it's like to operate from fear and how that fear can turn into anger. So we know what Darth Vader is like. We know what the evil sorcerer is, because we know what it's like when we want other people to suffer, when we want to cast a spell on them. So the shift that I talk about, the shift that I think the original psychologists were teaching us about, was a shift in the way of thinking. And that's going to come real clear into play here today. I was asked recently at a parent lecture I was teaching here in Utah to a group of parents who had their child enrolled in a treatment program. And somebody beautifully and humbly asked the question, how do I deal with what I am seeing in my child without letting the fear, the hurt, the sense of a personal rejection affect my decisions and my behavior? And I thought, this was the opening question in a lecture where I was going to talk about some tools and some skills. And I said, I'm glad you asked that question at the outset, because in the end, you'll have to think about things differently than you do now to be successful. See, when I learned to listen to my children's pain, their anger, their blame, through the ears that I have today, through the eyes that I have today, when I learned to see them through the eyes that I have today, I'm not white knuckling it through my personal rejection, my hurt, and my fear. I'm not feeling rejected. I'm not feeling fear. I have, through my work, gathered a greater perspective, a bigger way of understanding human behavior, what adolescents are working out in themselves and how that relates to the parent. And due to these greater resources with my experience and my personal work, I'm able to take in what the child is doing and saying with more patience, with more calm. I'm literally less afraid because I think differently about it. I was just talking to my daughter about this. I don't know if she'd ever heard this story before, about some self-harming behavior that she was practicing some years ago, many years ago, some dangerous behavior. She had confessed it to me or shared it with me in a vulnerable, courageous moment. And I listened and I saw it for what it was. A couple of weeks later, her therapist heard the same story and called and shared that with my wife. I wasn't a part of that exchange. And my wife came to me with the news, well, this is what's going on with our daughter. And I said, I'm so sorry. I forgot to tell you. And she said, well, what do you mean you forgot to tell me? She said, I said, I found out about this a couple of weeks ago and I forgot to share it with me. And she looked at me, as you might imagine, incredulous. How could you have forgot to tell me? And I said, to be frank with you, I didn't think it was as dramatic and dire as the therapist did. I saw it for what it was. In fact, I saw her sharing with me as her taking a step away from it. The minute you begin to talk about it, to confess that to a therapist, to a mentor, to in this case a parent, is the moment you're taking a step away from. I wish I had told you. I told my wife I wasn't doing it intentionally. I just forgot about it because I felt differently about it than the therapist did. I had a different perspective because of my experience, because of my therapy, because of where my nervous system is today, how it responds to things. You see, I love explaining this because to me, this goes right to the fundamental nature of this shift. If you grow up with a poor attachment, and it's really a continuum, it's not black and white like secure positive attachment and anxious attachment. It's not that binary. It's a continuum. But to the extent you grow up with a poor attachment, with a parent who is anxious and afraid and incapable of co-regulating for you their nervous system, offering their nervous system their calm as a way of you learning to know, to experience at a visceral unconscious level that it's going to be okay. If you don't have that attachment experience that you carry around in your body, having a secure attachment is having the sense that I am home, that it's going to be okay, that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to make it. If you don't have that experience because of something that is nearly invisible to the naked eye, at least to the layperson, if you don't have that experience and carry that around with you, then your only conclusion, your only way to cope with life, with its uncertainty, with its pain, with its turmoil, with its trauma, is to try to control it. So you have two outcomes essentially from childhood. And really, again, they're on a continuum. But at the extremes, you have these two outcomes. One is that I know I'm okay. My therapist said it to me a couple of years ago when I was going through something very difficult in my professional life. And I was expressing to her the stress, the fear. And she said to me very calmly, the one thing I know about you after working with you all these years is that you'll be okay and you'll figure it out. And she just said it very simply like that. And I said, I know you're right. I know you're right. I'm going to be okay. I remember dropping my daughter off. We were pretty conservative about our children spending the night at other people's house and them at our house, but there was an age where we allowed it. And I'm dropping her off at a party where there was parents. It was Halloween, and the way she was dressed and the way that her friends were dressed concerned me a little bit. They were young women dressing like young women, and I still saw my daughter as a little girl. And I literally had the thought, if something bad happens tonight, I can deal with that. That's how I talked myself into dropping her off calmly. I realized I'm actually kind of good in a crisis, a mental health crisis, or when somebody experiences trauma. So if something bad happens, I'll know what to do. And while you don't have to practice that thought experiment every day all the time, that's the experience of having a secure attachment, or in my case, an earned attachment, which is what happens later through your own personal therapy work, not necessarily from childhood. So with that earned attachment, that secure attachment that happens later in life, I don't need to control the weather because I can weather the storm. So the number one, if there is a tool, and I don't think there's a really good argument against this, I'd be open to it. But if there is a tool that I suggest that parents bring to bear in their parenting, it is their regulated nervous system. And the reason I encourage you to go to Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous and other parents like me meetings or support groups or psychotherapy is not because you're going to get all these wonderful analysis and answers and slogans. Those help you, of course. But because that's the place that you go to be comforted, where other people who have more experience than you offer their nervous systems to you so that you can co-regulate with them. And some of them have been through some horrendous examples. Some of them have lost loved ones related to mental health mental illness and addiction issues. And yet somehow, in the wake of that, they're there to offer you their regulated nervous system to know that you're going to be okay. See, most people go, I always say this, most people go hoping in the back of their mind that since I'm going to Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous, which are recommended often by people who have loved ones that are suffering from mental illness and addiction, if I'm going to that class that is recommended to those people, they for sure are going to have the secrets that I can prevent the bad thing from happening from me. But you can't. You can't do it. And in your efforts to try to control circumstances outside of you, because that's the only thing you know, the only thing that makes sense to you, you inadvertently expose your children to what we call complex trauma, to your unowned fear and anxiety. Albert Einstein famously said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them." If our collective memories were wiped, but we still had the same thinking, we would eventually recreate all the same organizations, religions, circumstances, and situations, because that's what this kind of thinking does. But if we can learn to see things differently, to feel differently about things, we are then ripe for a big kind of change that makes a difference in our lives. Quite commonly at the end of presentations, I wrote this. At the end of a presentation on communication and consequences, some parent will say to me, "But I think I've done all of that. I'm not perfect, but I've done all of it. And none of it worked." So let's explore this question. What if you did do everything right and it still doesn't work? First of all, it's critical to remember that it's not about you. In other words, you doing things right doesn't necessarily guarantee that anybody else will do anything right. Healing your codependency, getting better at boundaries, does not fix the child. And I think sometimes we as clinicians are guilty of implying that. So that's the first point. You getting healthier doesn't fix anybody else. You healing your codependency only heals your codependency. And aside from that, healthy parenting is its own reward. Healthy parenting is healthy living. You've heard the phrase, virtue is its own reward. See, I think we still think in this world that if I do good things will happen to me. And we know from experience that's not always true. Healthy parenting is its own reward. It creates a better life for you and your family. It means being a better mother, father, brother, sister, and friend, a better person, a healthier, more conscious, more regulated, more grounded, more clear, more confident person. This is the goal of healthy parenting, to become the most whole, complete person that you can be, complete parent that you can be. So the idea that anything I would teach would fix your kids is a problem with the old kind of thinking. You're just bringing the old kind of thinking to me, listening to what I say and seeing how you can plug it into that paradigm. Now, the way I answered this person who asked the question at this class I taught this week was to quote the first line of this poem. Really the second one, but the first line in the poet's response. The name of the poem is On Children, and it's written by Khalil Gibran. And it goes like this. And a woman who held a babe against her bosom said, "Speak to us of children." And he said, "Your children are not your children." I'm going to go back to that line. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. What a disaster, I often say, it would be if our children turn out exactly the way that we wanted them to. That means life wouldn't progress. Look at what children, I mean, we could talk about the problems in the world. I'm not very interested in that right now at all. But look at what children are aware of today. Look at what you're aware of compared to your parents and your grandparents in terms of mental health. Look at what we know today compared to people 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and so on. It is profound. Back to the poem. Life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark on the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he also loves the bow that is stable. Now, I want to go back to that early line. This is a mantra that I repeat in my head as a father very often. My children are not my children. They're not mine. If I do my work, if I focus on my regulated nervous system, if I focus on my own serenity, and I try to show up accordingly, I get to be a part of their lives. But I don't own them. See, when I was younger, and I didn't think this at all, I would have thought you were crazy if you'd come to me when I was younger and told me this. But when I was a young parent, I thought my children's bodies were mine. I thought my job was to make their bodies do and say and behave the way that I thought that people should. And I used all of my energy, all of my resources to try to get them to walk through life the way that I thought that they should. And I'm so lucky, by some kind of grace, that they haven't cooperated with that plan. And to a very large extent, they've all become themselves. Some did it through just placating me, looking good on the surface, but doing what they wanted to do in the shadows. Some of them fought with me directly. Those ones, of course, became the identified patient. But I'm so grateful that my children didn't follow through with what I thought was best for them. Because in many cases, they have accomplished a way of being, a life that I could have never given to them. And it is their life. And now that they are, 3 of them are adults, the 4th one to be an adult soon, now I get the joy of watching them live their distinctly different life than mine. Distinctly different ideas, choices, and I get the joy of seeing their otherness and embracing it. Like I said, the one tool that I recommend consistently to parents is that they bring to bear their own regulated nervous system. This is the most important tool for parents. Everything else will fall into place when your nervous system is realized, when it is regulated. So this becomes the primary project for parents. So that's why I say do your work, go to your meetings, go to your psychotherapy. You want to help your child get into school? You want to help your child deal with their anxiety, deal with their addiction, their self-harm, their depression? Go first, take care of your nervous system, because if you don't, if you come with a dysregulated nervous system, or again, it's a continuum, to the extent your nervous system is dysregulated, you will parent the child to serve your needs, to regulate your nervous system, to take care of you. So I want to share a few ideas, a few shifts that give us a new context for boundaries and for letting go. The first one is that, well, the first one I've already shared, that your children are not yours. And when you think about it in that way, now, again, I love my children, my 4 children. I love my 4 children as much as I, Brad, am capable of loving anybody. I don't know how much that is, but whatever my capacity is, that's how much I love them. But they are not mine. And when I incorporate that sense, that idea into my body, it informs the way that I react to them. I react to them so much less angry, so much less scared, so much less controlling. I use less intimidation and fear and shame. And oh, by the way, I still use all of those things, but I'm using the word less. When I am afraid, when I am dysregulated, and unfortunately my children know when I'm dysregulated and know what that word means, and so they'll tell me that. Doesn't matter what I do. It almost has no value. When on the other side of things, when my nervous system is regulated and I'm coming from a place of love, it's really hard to get it wrong. You see, at this core way of thinking, there's only really two primary energies in the world. It's love and fear. And I think one of the most insidious dynamics that I observe in our culture is that parents are teaching their children that their fear, the parents' fear, is the same as the parents' love, and it's not. I see parents acting from fear, behaving in certain ways with their children from fear. And when they are confronted or the child's upset, I hear parents say, it's just because I love you. And my thought is, and sometimes in the right context, I can say it, it's not that. You're afraid right now. You do love your child more than anybody. That's inarguable. But right now you're operating from fear, which is normal for you to have. But if you don't take responsibility for that, if you make the child responsible for your fear, and the way you're acting is making the child responsible for your fear, and then you're telling them it's your love, they will be absolutely blind in the world. To not know the difference between fear and love puts anybody at a huge disadvantage. So the first idea, I suppose, was the idea that your children are not your children. The second idea comes from an interaction that I had with a parent at a parent group in London several years ago, where a mother, before the parent group started, by saying to me, I've heard about your work, and I heard that you had the magic elixir, the balm, the medicine. And after I thought about that for a few minutes, I came back to her and I said, as I started my presentation, I reshared what she shared with me. And I said, here's the thing, your child is the medicine. Your child is here to wake you up from your slumber, to help you see things differently, to ask different questions, to find new answers to life's most important questions. The identified patient, one of its primary functions is to wake the family up to things that they are ignoring and avoiding, to challenge the status quo, to challenge the intergenerational legacy of ideas and concepts that have long outworn their original usefulness. So the child is the medicine. You being you listening to this podcast or watching this podcast live is, in essence, a result of somebody in your life that's struggling. Maybe a marriage. Often it's a child. Could be your mother, your father, a sibling, a friend. It could be anybody. That's part of what they serve, so that you come here looking for answers. And again, what I think that most people think is that they're going to get the answers that will fix the other person, that will lovingly manipulate the other person into greater mental health. But of course, what you learn here is it's you that's the problem. And that's not bad news. That's the best news you could receive. Because when you're the problem, guess what? You're also the solution to the problem. If somebody else is the problem, that's really bad news. That tells me that you have no control, virtually no control, over your own serenity and peace of mind. So the first idea that this situation, this gift, if you will, wrapped in the crappiest wrapping paper, the gift of the child's struggle is the medicine. It is the cure. It is the invitation. It is the call to the heroic journey. The second idea or third idea, depending upon how you're counting this evening, is similar. The child is here to teach you, to save you, not the other way around. See, I think most of us parents, and this makes sense, right? This just looks, on its surface, it looks like the most logical, reasonable paradigm. Most people think that we're here to save the child. You know, it's like rescuing a dog. And if you've ever done that or ever known somebody that's done that, you will know and hear inevitably the phrase, who rescued who? Yes, I rescued this dog that was sick, that was alone, that was aging. But the change that they made in me was more profound than I think the change I made in them. And that's true of our children. The child is the teacher, not the student. I once heard somebody say, I've been repeating the same message to my child over and over again. And the other person in the dialogue said, who here is the slow learner then? You're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Who's the slow learner? It's like somebody who doesn't speak your language, so you raise your voice. They don't have a hearing problem. You're not speaking the same language. When you realize that the child is the teacher and that you are the student, everything changes. See, then the tools make sense. And I'll talk about them, but then the tools make sense. Then we know to what ends we are to use them. And the next idea is that as children mature, they expose the immaturity of their parents. Many of you probably have this experience on your journey with your parent. And again, we're not picking on parents because we can pass that stuff all the way back to our parents, to our parents' parents, to their parents' parents, and so on. We're not looking for villains. We're not looking for somebody to be the scapegoat in this story. This is how life unfolds. We are evolving spiritually and psychologically. And the greater healing you bring, the more you stand up and say, I'm not gonna pass on this legacy to my children. The greater healing you bring to your child, they start farther ahead in the race, the mental health race, if you will. It's not a race because it's only you. But on the journey, they start farther ahead on the journey than you did. And then they bring greater healing to their children, who then start farther along on the journey than their parents. And in this way, your love, which is operationally your work, right? I talk about that a lot. The best way I can show my children that I love them is by doing my work. I go to therapy for many reasons, and one of them is to show the people that I love them. As children mature, they expose the immaturity of their parents. They reveal the parts that their parents have avoided up to this point, the aspects, the issues that their parents have avoided. I wrote in The Journey of the Rogue Parent the difference between strict and control. Strictness is just a measure of structure, from strict to permissive. But really, the continuum that I pay attention to is what I call the control versus influence continuum. Control is not a measure of how strict you are. I've seen strict parents who are not controlling, and I've seen permissive parents who are controlling. In fact, I would argue that in my career, it's not a landslide by any means, but most of the controlling parents that I have met are permissive. Let me say that again. It's not a landslide. It's not 90% to 10, but the majority of parents that I have worked with, who I would label as controlling, fall in the permissive category. Control is when you use shame, intimidation, threat of abandonment, guilt, repetition, nagging, debate. It's simply put, is when you try to emotionally coerce your child into behaving the way that you want them to. Strict is just a measure of the structure. Strict is saying, if you finish your cleaning your room, you can go out. If you finish eating your dinner, you can have dessert. Controlling is when we start to try to convince them to do what we want them to do. Eat your vegetables. You liked them last week. Do you want to be big and strong like your big sister, your big brother? Dessert's your favorite. All right, if you don't eat it, I'm going to eat all of it. There's going to be none left, right? We try to get them to do what we want them to do when the consequence was fine as it was set up. Strict is not controlling. Permissive is not influential. It's a complex matrix. I had a mother who was I was working with her in the context of her daughter's eating disorder. And when I was talking about some simple boundaries around the house, the mother was saying, no, Brad, You don't know much about eating disorder. See, it's all based on control. And I said, I don't think what I'm describing is controlling. You do the tests, the blood tests, and if she looks okay, then she gets to be on the cheer squad. Was what she wanted to do. She gets to have her license. Controlling, I explained to this mother, is when you tell her that she's disgusting. When you tell her that you would have never done this to your mother. When you tell her that nobody's ever going to love her with this eating disorder. And all those things she had said. See, that's controlling. Or when I had a staff member in my program on a hike say, I want to give the kids in the group an I feel statement. And I said, what for? And he said, well, they're walking all over this sensitive biology, this cryptobiotic soil. And they're not following the rules of low impact camping. And I said, well, why are you going to share a feeling statement with them? Well, I want them. I said, don't share a feeling state with them. Just gather them together and let them know that if they don't practice low impact camping, we're going to have to move down the road. None of them want to pack up, camp, and move. So just set up a simple consequence. Don't layer on top of it the shame. Don't suggest to them that they have to believe what you believe. See, when you shift the paradigm and understand these fundamental ways of thinking need to be changed, you realize that boundaries aren't about controlling other people. Boundaries are about self-care. Taking care of your serenity is your main job. But most parents abdicate this responsibility of their serenity to their children. I know I have most of my parenting life. I have told my children how I feel, used appropriate communication skills, language, nonviolent communication. But what I have implied is you need to behave well so I can sleep at night. You need to stop hurting yourself so I'm not worried. You need to stop using drugs so I'm not disappointed or angry or sad or scared. You have to change so I can feel good. That is the fundamental way that I think parents on this planet hurt their child. They make the child take care of them. They imply that the child has to take care of them. Boundaries make sense when you realize they're for you. They're for self-care. When you come from a place of this is what I need in this situation with this responsibility that I have to feel okay. Similar to boundaries, letting go. What does that mean? Well, it's a paradox, first of all. It's paradoxical. When you let go, you become more effective. You become more influential. Letting go means telling the truth, not lying or exaggerating or charging your communication with intense emotions. It's being honest, not trying to get others to think that you're trustworthy. It's offering a heartfelt apology, not seeking forgiveness. Letting go means setting the right boundaries for you and accepting what relationships are, that people have choices, that they are their own agents. It means focusing on what you can control and letting go of what you can't, which is others. Letting go means loving somebody, not trying to get them to feel loved. That's a very different thing. To love somebody and to try to get them to feel something are two entirely different projects. Letting go is healthy parenting. It's practicing healthy parenting principles, not raising good or well-behaved children. It's like holding things lightly for a stronger grip. I was reminded when I was preparing for this of the 85% rule that is attributed to the athlete Carl Lewis, the multiple gold medal winner in the 1984 Olympics, I think it was. He found that by training and racing at 85%, that he was actually faster than when he tried to go all out. The 85% rule attributed to Carl Lewis is a guideline often used in sports and athletic training. The rule suggests that an athlete can perform at their best when they're about 85% of the maximum effort or capacity. Letting go means focusing on your swing in tennis or golf, not aiming the ball. When I was a little league pitcher, well, actually, I was the best in practice on my team often. I ended up batting fourth, which is usually one of the 2 or 3 best hitters. I was a pitcher. That came out through tryouts and in practice. And as the season progressed, I stopped being able to pitch, and I ended up moving down to ninth in the batting order or even on the bench because I was so afraid of failing that I was trying to aim the ball, right? I was trying to get it right. I used to talk about, if you can imagine, like doing a simple layup in basketball in front of a stadium of people. Can you imagine the fear and anxiety and how hard that simple task is? Letting go means being true to yourself. It means operating from a place of groundedness and truth and self, not trying to control or aim it at changing others. On the cover of the STEP Parenting Manual, Systematic Training in Effective Parenting is what that stands for. On the cover of it, when I first started my career, they had the quote, "The greatest challenge in parenting teens is to focus on changing yourself, not your teenager." 30 years ago, I saw that quote, and I'm teaching about it today still. If you want something a little bit more recent, the great teacher Daniel Siegel said, research in the field of child development has demonstrated that a child's security of attachment, the number one thing we can do for our children, is strongly connected to the parent's understanding of their own early life. In other words, you have to do your work. And he goes on to say, even if we have come to understand ourselves well, and that might be true of some of you on this part of the journey where you're at, even if we have come to understand ourselves well, our children will still make their own journey through life. Do you see how he's saying your children are not your children? He goes on to say, although we may supply them with a secure foundation through our own deeper self-understanding, our role as parents serves to support our children's development, not guarantee its outcome. It's like what Yoda said. Fear leads to anger, and anger leads to the dark side. That's Joseph Campbell's teaching. That's Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung's teaching. If we're operating from a place of fear, our impulse is to control. If we're operating from a place of peace and serenity and love, then we're operating in a completely different way, completely different relationship, completely different goals. And then the tools like boundaries make sense. And the journey of the heroic parent that I wrote, the trick is to let go of the idea of holding yourself responsible for your children. Their success and failures aren't yours, while still holding yourself responsible for what you do. It's like when people come up to me, I remember when they congratulated me on my children's accomplishments. Congratulations on your son getting into college. Congratulations on your daughter becoming a psychologist. And my response is, I didn't do that. Now, if you congratulated me on my patience because you saw me being patient with my child, I would say thank you. If you congratulated me on showing up to a crisis grounded and regulated, I would say I've been working so hard on that. But their choices aren't mine. They're not my children. They're not mine. They're theirs. See, until we begin to take responsibility for our lives and our serenity and stop projecting that task, that role, that responsibility onto others, we'll never be in a relationship that is intimate. We'll never be in a relationship that supports the other and their journey. Gandhi said, I want to show people that the only devils worth fighting are the ones running around inside of their own hearts. Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about another can give us a better understanding of ourselves. From the King James New Testament, we read, and why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, or thy child's eye? But considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye. First cast the beam out of thine own eye. Then you will see clearly. Then thou shalt see clearly to cast the mote out of thy brother's eye, which you won't do. You can't force a rose to bloom. It will bloom when it's touched and kissed by the love of the sun. The greatest challenge in parenting teaches is to focus on changing yourself, not your teenager. I thought about this today, kind of as a concluding thought from James Hall's. This was specifically shared in his book on marriage. But I thought it helpful as it relates to parenting and boundaries. And I suppose boundaries can relate to marriage just as much as children. He explains that all projection occurs unconsciously, of course. For the moment one is observed, I have made a projection, one is already in the process of taking it back. So once you realize that you've asked your child to do things that are your responsibility, like give you a piece of serenity, help you remain calm, help you find joy, happiness, meaning, satisfaction in life. Once you realize that you've assigned that job, that role to them, you begin to take it back. It's your job. Your serenity is your responsibility. Your nervous system is your responsibility. Your happiness, your disappointment, your pride, those are all about you. And the moment that we load those onto our children, they crumble under the weight of the responsibility of taking care of us, because the child is not meant, not built to take care of the adult. You do your work. You show up, you listen, you share your frustration, your disappointments, your hopes, your dreams, everything that you deal with, all of it somewhere else. You do that as a way of showing your children that you love them. You share your disappointments, your tears with other people. They hold you. They support you, so your children don't have to take care of you. Don't have to show up in this world so that you're okay, so that you can sleep at night and eat well. And the minute you realize that you've been doing that, the minute you're beginning to take back that projection, that responsibility, and give it back to the rightful owner, which is you. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps. Like I said in the beginning, my 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, you want to know what I'm talking about when I say your own work, the Finding You Intensive is that offering. October 1st, we still have a spot left next week. November 5th, December 3rd, January 7th. These are 4.5-day workshops, all included, relatively inexpensive. And it's an opportunity for you to see what your project is and to understand that it is you that are your problem. You're not the problem, you're just your problem. And you realize what your project is. See, like I always say, nobody likes to be the project. Not adults, not children. Nobody likes to be the project. So make yourself the project. Stop making the child the project. Stop making your wife the project, your husband the project, your mother the project. Make yourself the project. Like Henry Miller said, like most men, I realize that I am my own worst enemy. But unlike most men, I also know that I am also my savior. If you want to join a support group, if you are an alumni of the Finding You programs, October 15th is that next offering. If you want a coach or a therapist who follows in this model, go to our website for all of this information or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. If you want to do a 5-day workshop in the Hudson Valley with me this October 12th through 17th, go to the Omega website at eomega.org. Go to the workshops tab and then click on the Audacity to Be You and sign up there. If you are in the Bay Area and you want to work with me for a day in the Bay Area, for half a day in the Bay Area, I'm going to be talking about bringing compassion to parenting, a parent coaching workshop in collaboration with the Palo Alto Preparatory Academy. So check that out. You can go to our website or email us to find out more. My next broadcast will be this Thursday. Last week I said I was going to do 2 broadcasts, but I didn't get those accomplished. I wasn't feeling well. So hopefully my health will hold me up this week. I'll be talking, I'll do an Ask Me Anything for our group, and I'll release that to the general public, not just to the inner circle. So there'll be one for those of you who are not members, so you can see what you're missing. So that'll be this Thursday, September 25th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. This Thursday, September 25th, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Ask me anything. You can send in questions. If you are a subscriber to our inner circle, you can attend live and ask your questions live also. Email us, of course, for those at info@findingyouprograms.com. If you have any suggestions, any questions, any topics, any books that you want me to cover, I'm happy to do that in the future. Just email me at info@findingyouprograms.com. Folks, I hope this is a helpful point of contact. Hope something I said touched you. I hope you feel not so alone and know that all of us are on the same journey. All the therapists, all the experts you've ever worked with are struggling with the exact same things you are. We might be at different points in the journey, but we're all in this together. As always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up to these broadcasts and listening, because the change in you makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you Thursday night. Take care. Bye-bye.